Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Taylor Brana, and I want to welcome you to the show today. We have an amazing series. This is Doctors on Social Media teaching podcasting. Now, some people might watch this and be like, wait, doctors podcast, or they have radio shows, or they're doing other stuff. And the fact of the matter is, we're all human. We have so many different interests. And besides helping out patients, we also want to grow, whether it's our business, our brand, helping our family, our friends, educating the greater whole. It's part of our duties to take all the information that we know and teach. So we're very passionate teachers, a lot of us. And that's why we're also very passionate about teaching the process and the art of podcasting. Now, this is episode 5. And for today's show and for today's series, we're going to be teaching about the process or the thinking around branding. So if you haven't seen the other episodes, we go through the different parts of podcasting, and branding is a very important concept. But before I get into all of that, just know that this is a show produced by SoMeDocs, or Doctors on Social Media, and they're building out other courses, other ways to improve your social media skills, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok in the future, podcasting, all of this stuff. So even though I'm teaching podcasting today, just know that there's a network behind this that's teaching all of this stuff. And we're physicians, health professionals. We're trying to network. We're trying to grow together. So this is all very exciting stuff. So for this, we're going to be focusing in on podcasting. And I have 2 amazing guests. I'm super pumped. I'm pumped as always. But today, I got some powerhouse people. So first off, I'm going to bring up Dr. Colin Zhu. Dr. Colin Zhu is a board-certified family practice and OMT specialist, also lifestyle medicine. He's passionate about the intersection of medicine, food, and nutrition. Dr. Zhu trained as a chef and a health coach at the Natural Gourmet Institute for Health and Culinary Arts and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition following completion of his medical degree. To share his unique blend of medical knowledge with a wider audience, Dr. Zhu launched The Chef Doc in 2017, an online wellness and lifestyle education platform, which has been featured in several publications. Dr. Zhu is an international speaker, the author of Thrive Medicine, How to Cultivate Your Desires and Elevate Your Life, and is the podcast host of Thrive Bites, in which he interviews the latest health and wellness experts about incorporating a plant-powered lifestyle, enhancing emotional wellness, and creating a thriving mindset. His latest venture is in his emotional wellness and creating a thriving mindset for everyone who wants to join. He has a signature event for 2021, which is a self-educational masterclass series called the THR5 Formula, where he combines inspiration, education, and practical tools on how to thrive. Here you'll learn the five to thrive pillars: food as medicine, functional fitness, relationships, community, and emotional resilience. That is super amazing. Colin Zhu, thank you so much for being on today.
I'm super thrilled, honored, and privileged to be here again with you, Taylor. So thank you for having me again.
Awesome. And our next guest we're going to have on is physician Dr. Jordan Frey. He didn't get the memo on the really lengthy intro here. I'm just messing. Jordan Frey is a plastic surgeon in Buffalo, New York. He is one of the fastest growing physicians in the financial blogger space. And by the way, I just love your blogs, and I think it's super informative. And he's the founder of the Prudent Plastic Surgeon. He's also the host of a popular interview-style podcast called Doctors and Dollars. So, Jordan Frey, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me too. I'm just hungry now after listening to Colin's bio. I'm ready to eat some food. I want some of that stuff.
Yo, do we need to just switch this up right now? Or are we just gonna watch?
Yeah,
Colin,
we should just have virtual, cook-offs and demos.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's each other
right now.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, so guys, before we get into branding today, I'm gonna pop up our introduction video and let's get started. All right, guys. So let's get started with this concept of developing a podcast brand. Now, I'll field this over to Colin first. Okay. So, Colin, what do you like? What is your definition, or what's your working way of thinking about like branding? Like, what is that?
That's a very, it's different from a physician's perspective. Obviously, we know of all kinds of popular brands, throughout the world historically growing up, anything from like Nike to Reebok to, Coca-Cola, things like that. And the way I think of branding, at least from a healthcare provider or physician point of view, is, it's allowing your creative expression to kind of come alive. I think this is the fun part of allowing the individual, the personality to really come through. And in a lot of ways, it actually goes along with the art of medicine. When I created my brand, the Chef Doc 4 years ago, going on 5 now, it was really a chance for me to kind of open up another side of myself, which for me, I've always been, true to myself, but allowing everyone to see like, hey, there's many different sides of being a physician. And so that was an opportunity to creatively express myself. So.
Awesome. Awesome. And Jordan, what are your thoughts on branding?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I think of it, I kind of got into this without even necessarily like thinking about that on the forefront. And as I look back, it's sort of just like the core like values or message that I want to give out. Like, what is it that I'm looking to accomplish? Or when someone thinks of interacting with, whether it's my blog or podcast or whatever, that they're going to get out of it. And so without even knowing it, like for both the blog and the podcast, one of the first things I did was just write down on like a Word document, a quick, like 1 to 3 sentence thing about what it was that I was going to try to do and that, or be. And if I'm ever confused or sort of like, am I doing what I want to, or am I giving others what I want to give them? I can always refer back to that. And that's sort of what I imagine as my brand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is it's this artistic identity, or this way of identifying yourself. So Colin, you have more of this artistic sense of it. Jordan, I'm hearing maybe a little bit, it's more logical and rational for you. These are my main things that I hit, which I love, by the way, because every person's very different, right? We have the more artistic side, we have the more like rational thinking side, but that's what brand is, right? Brand is your identity, which has this sort of core messaging and has this sort of look and feel. And I think that's what's so interesting about brand is there's so many parts to it. So I guess for the beginner or someone who's trying to start to define or create their brand, I'll start, I guess, with Jordan this time. I think you kind of started to answer it, but how would you go about executing on starting to create your brand? Like, what do you think about?
Yeah, that's what I would do is almost just sit down and however long it takes or whatever, just some quiet time to say, what is it that I want to provide, or what value, what message do I want to be giving out? And just even write that down. I do that with a lot of different stuff, and it sounds like kind of a silly exercise, but I just write down, like really basic things. Like, I want this podcast to be authentic. I want it to, talk to regular doctors. I want it to talk about their struggles with finances, just very basic things like that. And it's always going to evolve. I like anything, and we can all probably attest to this. You're going to have to get started before you're ready. You're not going to have your brand perfectly identified. You're not going to have everything, perfectly set up, and you just start, and then you kind of find your way. And it's okay to have a central sort of brand and then offshoots from that. But the brand will always kind of keep things cohesive.
Colin, how would you start?
So kind of going along with what Jordan said, I think the core messaging and having those core values is important. I don't think it's, it's also fair to say like, you want to do it similar to as if you're building a company, right? Because at the end of the day, whether you choose to make money with it or not, there is a sort of like identifying piece of it. And that's, I think it's a good idea to come up with like a mission statement, a vision statement, asking yourself, what are the goals of this brand? slash company slash organization, whatever have you. And I think the core of it is, if starting out, if it's just really yourself as the person, but you're also, being a professional slash healthcare slash physician avatar, it's really about, who am I at the end of the day? I think, when I started off in medicine, I actually did locums for 4.5 years. And for those of you who don't know what locums is, it's basically Latin to hold a place to help out other doctors. And during that time, I had to figure out what I wanted to do professionally, not in terms of specialty, but what kind of doctor I wanted to be. So in the same vein, creating your own brand is a very creative and fun way of asking yourself, who am I at the end of the day, and what do I choose to put out there into the world? So I think starting off with, a logo design, starting off with some brand colors, playing around, with, your mission and vision statement will kind of hone in. But, kind of like what Jordan's saying, I would also add, keep it simple. Because you could always change it and evolve and do something else later, but keep it simple to really who you are. And I wouldn't do more than like 3 things to stick to. So
yeah. And so a big part of branding is kind of the design part, right? Like, okay, so I start to think about who I am as a person. Or some people, and I don't know if you guys had this thing happen to you, but at least for me, when I was starting, I was nervous about showing off myself. So for me, when I started, I actually, like, my branding, so to speak, was like this other thing. And then slowly it started to come back to who I actually was. I think a lot of people get nervous about like presenting themselves. So I ended up being like way overly professional first, and that's not who I am. But like, let me come back to a question here, which is like, how did you guys actually go about picking, let's say, color scheme or font or logo design? Like, was there a process, or did you just kind of go for it? Like, and I'll put this over to Jordan first. Like, what did you do for like the actual design part of it?
I basically just Googled. I mean, in the beginning, what I did was I Googled how to create a logo. And then I eventually like read some articles, and I went on Canva and just like chose some stuff and was like, I like this color. I think this font is cool. I had my wife look at it, and she was like, no, that's really, really bad. And then I changed it, and that's kind of how it started. It's evolved now where I know like a person who has done logos in the past and stuff like that. So I'll ask them to do it, and they can sort of make it cohesive with the rest of my stuff. But yeah, like the color scheme I use is literally just, I chose something that I thought looked cool. That's kind of how I did it. I don't know, Colin, maybe yours was more like a little more professional starting, but yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah, so like if you see, like, let's see over there, that's the chef doc, and that's actually created with beads. A very close friend of mine did that for me. And yeah, so mine was similar. I didn't even know about Canva, and Canva is like one of the top platforms to really do anything, to kind of just sample things that are already created in terms of templates, and just to kind of mess around. If you are more creative and you like to hand draw, stencil, paint, definitely go from there, because you have the most control, most like free thinking, most free form, right? Canva is a great tool, and there's a lot of other platforms and apps that you can use as well. I went to, and when designing that, I went to a company that specialized in logo design. And what was cool was that you could do things one-on-one with a artist that you found their portfolio that resonated with you. I chose the second option, which was a logo design contest, where you have an idea of what you want to put out there into like 1 or 2 lines, and then it gets submitted to a whole bunch of logo artists, and then they come up with their perspective on what kind of logo that most closely represented what you are trying to get. And then after many, many, many different iterations, then you come to a final design. So that's how I came up with it. I did not think about that. It was after so many, that actually took 113 designs to get to that final iteration. Wow. So, it could be as, fun and long of a process, or it could be very short. It just really depends on, how much you care about that. So, and I wanted something to represent myself. So,
Yeah, and I want to point out again the discrepancy here, which I think is awesome because maybe like some people are just like, let me find something that works. This fits me. This fits my personality. Let's go. And then, Colin, you took a little bit more of the competition route where you found this page or this business that does this and you iterated a lot. And I think both approaches are fantastic, right? Because the nice thing about any brand is it doesn't have to be permanent and you can always rebrand. Although I will say with a caveat, which is after you start in a certain direction, when you do rebrand, it's kind of like a little bit of a break in the system. So I can understand both sides of it. I'm actually more on the Jordan side of things where I'm more like, let's just execute and then we'll figure it out as we go. But on Colin's end, I also understand the intelligent design. And the nice thing too is sometimes I feel like when it comes to brand, and you guys can agree or disagree, but I feel like sometimes you don't even know what the look is that you want until it gets sent out a bunch. And then all of a sudden you're like, ooh, I like those colors. I like how that looks. And then you can go off of that. So I do like if you have a little bit of money or you're able to outsource, I do like the idea of being able to have a bit of that professional design. Colin, do you feel like that was really helpful for you?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, I had no idea, I was going to choose that. I didn't even think about that, I just thought about, what did I do? Who do I represent? And, the look and feel of it, because I think that, like you said, it's best to kind of stick with one design that you're really, really confident on. And yes, over time, professionally and personally, we're going to grow and evolve. And that design may change, right? But in someone's psyche, when they associate you and your logo over time, it's like, because you could just, look at a Nike symbol and without words, that's Nike, so that's how branding works, right? And so I think depending on how much you care about that, is how much stock and time and resources you are choosing to invest into yourself. For me, it was more than just the brand and all the different products and services under that. I wanted to make sure it was unifying for myself.
So, guys, I want to flip this a little bit. I know we're touching on design, which I think is super important, and there's different approaches to design. But the other part of it is kind of a logical, rational part of branding, which is mission, vision, cultural values. Because in any brand or business, there's an underlying mission to what you're doing. There's an underlying vision to what you're creating. And then there's also the culture, or how do you want people to feel and act within your ecosystem, right? Like that's kind of the other aspect of the brand. So I was just curious what you guys think about that part of the branding. And I guess, Jordan, I'll hop over to you. Like, what are your thoughts around like mission, vision, and values when it comes to branding?
Yeah, I think that's the most important. Like that's probably, I think that's even more important potentially than, logo or getting caught up in that stuff, which is also important. But that's what I'm saying. I think first you figure out your mission and values and what you want to convey. And you can do that a number of ways. What I did was I got into personal finance. I started reading other blogs, looking at other podcasts, etc. And I felt that there was something missing. And so that's what my, sort of idea
Motivation.
or whatever it was. And then the values, it just comes from yourself. And I think there's probably a lot of physicians listening who either are seeing like, oh, we're talking about branding and like rolling their eyes or something like that. But it is something that we can all relate to as physicians, because even what I always think now about branding as a physician, even when you're starting a practice, everyone's kind of heard the recommendation of the 3 A's, like be affable, be able, be available, and then you'll be successful in starting your practice. That's branding. That's like kind of branding 101. You want, when someone thinks of you as a physician, someone that can help them, that they can refer patients to, whatever, that's your brand. And so whatever stage you are in your career, even if you're just a resident or an attending, you've created a personal brand for yourself as a physician. And that's basically what everyone else in the hospital thinks of you. This is the same thing, maybe just amplified a bit more.
Colin, what do you think about mission, vision, and culture values when it comes to your brand?
The way I think about it is, if you are operating from a business point of view and, you have intentions of going bigger, I feel like those words are important, and to some degree are usually just found once you click on the about us and about our team and or the about founder, to really have people like, okay, what is the core messaging, as per this person, in written form, and I feel like, that's very important, but I think it's more important in every single moment you decide to put yourself out there in the public space, whether it's writing an article, whether it's vlogging, whether it's something like this, it's really about keeping that same message, being honest and authentic every single time you put yourself out there, in the public space, so.
Yeah, Colin, you bring up a really good point, which we haven't really touched on yet, which is how are people finding out about you and how are they accessing you? And when they do, how do they feel from that moment, right? So that's like sort of the, because like, for example, if I were to do this with you guys and then I walk outside and then like I look like a complete mess and a wreck, they'll be like, wait a second, that's not fitting the image here, right? So, or if someone Googles one of us and then they see us sitting here professionally speaking well, and then they hop on and they're seeing all of this stuff that really isn't, fitting the image, so to speak. So like how people find out about you and what you're putting out there on digital media or even physically potentially, being out there. Everyone has a phone now, right? So like, so you're touching on a really important point. So like, how are you guys thinking about like, again, your website or what you're putting out in the sphere, so to speak? Like, how are you maintaining that integrity? Jordan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess the way I've basically done it is, my goal going in was just to be totally 100% transparent and authentic. So it's basically just me. I mean, I'm talking about a more specific topic, but I basically just, I didn't create separate social media or anything. Like it's just my own social media that now is the social media for my podcast and blog. So it all kind of merged into one because it is just that. If it was something where I did not want to be as transparent in terms of my identity or keep it a certain way, then I would have created different accounts and sort of more separated my personal name from it. But that's kind of how I did it.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say with that too is when you start to create, like, let's say you want to have multiple businesses and stuff, like I can attest to this, it is really difficult to have, instead of 3 or 4 social media accounts to going to 25 social media accounts. It just gets really complicated really quick. Obviously there's a use for that and maybe you need to hire someone to manage that, but
Right.
yeah, I do like that approach. Colin, what do you think?
I think going along to what he says, and what you've been saying in terms of maintaining integrity is, for me, the core messaging is, for me, that's important to me is authenticity. And I think that, unless you live in a black hole or hermit in the woods, someone's going to Google you nowadays and, you are searchable, and you can't really hide. So you have to make a conscious effort to decide, whatever path you choose to go on, that that you're okay being found in one way, shape, or form, right? So, humbly speaking, I've been interviewed a lot, whether it's articles and other podcasts such as this. And so when people search for me, they'll say like, "Hey, I found you on this podcast, or I found you through this article," and they would use that as a lead in to ask me a question or to go into something else, right? So for me, I feel better, going to bed at night knowing that, I put, my honest self as a person, as a human being, whether it's, on the street, day to day, to a complete stranger, to, not knowing if I'm going to be talking to someone in the Philippines, for example, virtually. So for me, I think it's just easier because, I've just remained true to myself. No matter what type of messaging I just, decide to put in. But I think, people really appreciate that, especially nowadays of, over information, misinformation, things like that. And unfortunately, a lot of time doctors get a bad rep. And so to combat that, it's important to remain honest and true to yourself, to me, in all aspects, not just branding.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important point, because specifically to podcasting, right? Like usually it's you're usually the brand, so to speak, right? It's you. Maybe you have a co-host, maybe you have a couple of their co-hosts, but in every business, most branding is determined by the leadership, right? And in this case, for podcasting, you are the leader of your podcast. So in essence, if you're not being authentic to who you are when you're speaking, and when you're putting out content and when you're creating, you're essentially doing everyone a disservice, because you're kind of just lying, right? So authenticity, in a way, in terms of podcasting, is like a proxy for truth, which is like, are you just being honest, right? So I think that I think this is, I just really want to hone in on this for a second, because if when it comes to podcasting specifically, and I'm glad we're like really hitting this, if you're not being honest, authentic, and trying to constantly sort of reform and grow into who you are, like if you're not constantly working on that and putting that out into the world, you've lost the main concept of the podcast. Because from my opinion, and let's see, I'd be interested to see what you guys think, but in my opinion, the reason why we listen to anyone in a podcast is because we like them, right? We like what they're saying. We like their knowledge. We like their, and so that's the brand, really, when it comes down to like the core. I think that's what it is. Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I've never quite, verbalized it in that way, but I think that is like so true. And that's what podcast or any of this is it's unique in that we get to see really intimately, kind of other people's perspectives and stuff. And if you're not doing that, and you find you're not doing that regularly, then you're probably, not really passionate or excited about the podcast, or maybe that's not really the right topic for you, or whatever it is. Because I think, being authentic is the number one part of it. Yeah.
Colin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you take, for example, Instagram is a very visual form, right? And we think of all kinds of perceptives or perceptions about how this person is just based off of pictures, right? And then you have Facebook, which combines a little bit of that with written form, a little bit of video, and then you have YouTube and et cetera, et cetera. So podcasting is interesting because, historically it's always been known as an audio format, and now, we're doing a lot of video nowadays. So I think that, with the video form, you have a lot more to consume and to understand and to get. You have the voice, you have the tone, you have the cadence, you have the body language, you have the facial expressions. So, even through all that, if you go from a 2D format of a visual platform to something like this, where you can see and hear it and see how we express ourselves, every single one of those movements and, iterations is a reflection of yourself. So I think it's much more than just branding, putting this stuff out there. It's really about how you show up at the end of the day, and how you choose to show up. And, being honest and authentic is part of that, that fun and creative puzzle, if you will.
Wow. Well, I love that we're finishing on this, because I think this is really hitting the nail on the head in terms of what branding really is, which is that authentic, honest transmission of who you are or who the leadership is to the world. And that identity. So before we close out, Jordan, we'll start with you. What are ways people can find out about you or reach out to you?
Yeah, you can reach me a bunch of different ways. You can go to my site, prudentplasticsurgeon.com, or you can email me at jordan@prudentplasticsurgeon.com. And then my podcast, you can just search any of the podcast players for Doctors and Dollars.
And Colin, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me at the Chef Doc on my IG handle, Facebook handle, and Thrive Bites, BITES, on my Instagram and any major platform. And our current season is on YouTube now. So
awesome. Well, everyone watching, listening, or hearing this later, I really want you to check out both Jordan Frey and Colin Zhu. They are really amazing guests. And I hope you do, if you heard anything in this episode that inspired you, gave you any concepts, any ideas that you felt were interesting or moved you, I want you to leave them reviews. I want you to reach out to them because I sincerely mean it. These are very impressive people that are doing great work, and they want to see you thrive and grow as well. I really want to appreciate your time, guys. And I hope to see you on some future content, future episodes, and all the great stuff that we do.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you to you both.
Okay, guys. So look, I know we just had an awesome episode. That was amazing. We talked all about branding. Now I'm going to get into even more content. I really just want to summarize a lot of the stuff that we learned from today's episode. Before we get to that, I do want to mention again, this is a production from Doctors on Social Media, and they teach more things than just podcasting. They're teaching things about writing, content creation, all the different social media platforms, speaking, public speaking, which is super important, all of these different pieces. And the network is just so impressive. Just like today, we did this video, we did this recording, right? And we had some great guests. You just don't know who's going to be sitting at the other end of the table who might have a set of advice or thinking or something else that might be able to take you to whatever it is that you want to achieve, right? So I just want to really highlight that. And you can check them out. The website's doctorsonsocialmedia.com. And as you're listening to some of this stuff, maybe you're like, I can't do this podcasting thing. This is way too confusing. Doctors on Social Media, we have a build a podcast service. So let's say you just don't know what to do and you need your hand held through the process, no problem at all. Doctors on Social Media can do that for you. So if you're interested, again, just reach out to me. You can message me. You can go to Doctors on Social Media. You can reach out to Donna Coriel, and we'll get that process started for you. So let's get into the main summary points of branding. I think this is going to be super important, and it's a lot of stuff we touched on. The first thing about branding is it's all about identity. Okay, so identity is, what do you want the identity of this business or podcast to be? Who are you as a person? How is that going to come across in this process, right? So all of that is super important for developing this brand that you're creating. The other question you want to ask is, how do you want people to think about your product or podcast? How do you want to come across when you're developing this series, this show? You really want to think about consciously, because if you don't think about it, then you might not design the colors, the brand, the feel, the music to really have that come across. So it's really important to ask questions about what it is that you're putting out into the world, and how do you want people to feel about it or see or think, right? If you want to be professional, you want to be dressed nice on the streams, right? If you want to be professional, you ought to work on some of your speaking skills if that's what you want to do. If you want to be a little bit more chill and more relaxed, you might want to, change the way you're kind of doing it, right? So it's just really important to think about, what it is that you're trying to do. The design, we already touched on that, but what are the colors? What's the look? What's the logo? What's how are you going to design this to really emphasize your brand? And of course, a lot of this stuff is really important to talk it out or write your ideas down or explore that through a various amount of mediums. But there's so many ways to do this. And obviously you can reach out to me seriously about design because there's so many resources to really, really understand this. Think about the flow and the process. How do you want people to find you? How do you want people to listen to your podcast? How are they getting to your podcast? How are they going to start to get more of the content, like teaching them about like subscribing, teaching them like what platforms to use? Is it Spotify? Is it Apple? Is it this? Is it that? How are they going to find you on the website? You want to be very conscious of the flow for them to find out about your brand, and making sure those pieces are in place. So when they do find out about you, that it's a positive experience, because that's really what it is. You want it to always be a positive experience, or for them to learn or enjoy getting to know you through the different avenues, whether it's a website, a podcast, a video stream, what have you, right? You really want to be conscious of your logo. And a lot of people think a logo is just an image, but you can have like the literal logo of like a brand, right? But there's also something called sonic branding, or a sonic logo, which is the audio or the music you use, right? So if you think about a sound like dun 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 dun, right? Or whatever like really well-known sounds that you've appreciated. like the Xbox sound or the PlayStation sound. Those are brands. That's branding. That's logo. So you want to be conscious of not just the physical logo, but also the audio logo. Maybe there's a video or like a video introduction, like the one we did in this one, right? That gives you a sense of that brand. That's all really important, something to think about. You want to define what it is that your brand does. And I wrote the word short because you want to be able to pitch your concept to people very efficiently. And ideally, you want to have that pitch set up in your podcast. So for example, mine might be like, the Happy Doc is the voice of fulfilled physicians and fulfilled humans, right? This is a podcast about allowing yourself to be happy and a thriving human through listening to this podcast, right? Like that's a short and sweet thing about that process, right? So you might want to have slogans, taglines, key messaging that allows people to know what it is that you're really trying to do through your show. Who you are, how you interact. It's really important when you're branding. Again, with a podcast specifically, you are essentially the leader usually. So who you are, how you're coming across, how you're interacting with people, having the integrity to be authentic throughout. That's like kind of what we were talking about at the end there. And following through on the things you say. All of those pieces are super important to forming a sense of identity that people like and trust. And thus they're going to appreciate the brand or the person or the thing that you're doing or whatever it is that you're putting out there into the world. It's the responsibility of yourself or the leadership team of whatever it is that you're producing to deploy the brand effectively. And what I mean by that is, if you have everything on paper, if you have the fonts, the colors, the feeling, the slogans, the key messaging, that all needs to be sent out effectively through all of the different platforms so people get a sense of what it is that who you are, what it is you're doing, all of that stuff. If it's not deployed properly or it's mismatched or it's not fitting in properly, people will get confused. And that's really important to really hone in on in terms of branding and in terms of podcast. You really want to get clear on the mission. What is it that you're trying to solve by doing this podcast? What makes you different? What makes you unique? What is it that you want to do uniquely for your podcast? Super important. What is the vision? What do you hope to, like, if you imagine like your podcast or show in 1,000 years, right? In 100 years, like what is the legacy? What is the thing that you want to create into the world? Where are you going to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? What is the vision of what is going to evolve from this? That's kind of a question. So the mission is what it is that you're trying to achieve. The vision is what does it actually look like when you've achieved it? What does that world look like? You want to get super clear on that. What is the culture you want to build, right? So the culture of the team is, a lot of people they break down their podcast into different words or phrases, but how do you want people to interact with your brand? How do you want people to feel when they listen to your podcast? What is that culture going to be like? How do you want people to look, feel? How do you want them to act? What does that team look like if you were to bring people on, right? So that culture is super important to define. It's actually one of the most important pieces, honestly, to a business. A lot of people don't think about it, but there's so much to talk about with culture. But long story short, you want to think about how it is that people act, behave, think. What are the values of the team that you're trying to create? This is super helpful in general when you're building out a brand. Form templates. Have specific templates for PowerPoints, for presentations, for your website, for the podcast. Have templates, have standards for the look and feel of your brand. So that way, when you teach people or you bring people on, or you just want to make it easier for yourself, have those templates, have those standards in place. That way, you're just making things more efficient, more easy. People can hop on and understand it and launch it, especially if you're going to have an assistant or someone else help you out. And again, the most important thing throughout the whole thing is once you figure out your brand, once you have everything down, you have the mission, the values, the culture, you have the colors, you have the look, you have the feel, you have the website, you have the social media channels, you have all of that in place. You got to be consistent in releasing content and consistent in your slogans, consistent in your messaging. And that's really going to lock in your brand. That's how those tunes get stuck in your head. That's how you know what Pepsi feels like versus cola. Right? That's all these different brands. Why do we like PlayStation more? Why do we like Xbox? Or why do we like Microsoft? Or why do we like Mac and Apple? Right? So all of that stuff is super important. So I hope that was valuable for you in terms of thinking about this entire process. I hope that was helpful. And guys, this is all about developing your brand in terms of a podcast, If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I hope to see you on the next episode of the series next week, Sunday at the same time. And take care, guys. Have a great one.